I never imagined I'd be walking through the grand oak doors of Eastwood Academy again, not as a nervous teenager clutching her math notebook, but as a member of its board of trustees. The polished floors reflected my heels with a soft click that somehow reminded me of the laughter echoing in the hallways decades ago, laughter aimed at me. I adjusted the sleeve of my silk blouse, feeling the smooth fabric against my skin, and glanced out the window at the sprawling campus, its red bricks glowing in the afternoon sun. Everything looked the same, except now, I was someone different. Stronger. Smarter. Unapologetically me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from the school secretary. Board meeting starts in 15 minutes. See you there, Chloe. I smiled, bitter and sweet all at once. The same place where I was mocked, underestimated, and written off, now expected to lead decisions that would shape its future. I remembered the whispering voices in the cafeteria, the snide jokes about my hand-me-down clothes, my dreams that nobody took seriously. And yet, here I was, standing at the threshold, every step a quiet defiance. Every breath, a reminder that resilience doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives in the form of power quietly claimed. I was 14 when Eastwood Academy felt like a cage instead of a school. My locker was the epicenter of whispered jokes, my backpack a symbol of not belonging. Every day, I tried to make myself small, fade into the background, but the laughter always found me. It started in the cafeteria. A group of older girls snickering behind their perfectly polished trays. Look at her shoes, one would whisper. Still wearing last year's style. Another added, eyes gleaming with that cruel delight teenagers wield so effortlessly. My hands shook as I clutched my lunch tray, the plastic wobbling. I remember biting the inside of my cheek to hold back tears, wishing someone, anyone, would see me differently. My parents were too busy, too distant, their eyes scanning their phones while I fumbled through another day of quiet humiliation. The teachers saw me, yes, but mostly as invisible, a footnote in their already overburdened class lists. Then there was Ms. Reynolds, my literature teacher. She had this quiet way of noticing things others didn't. One afternoon, she slid a small leather-bound notebook across my desk. For your stories, she said, and for the courage to write your own ending. Her words sank deep. I traced the cover with my fingers, feeling its smooth texture, and for the first time, a flicker of possibility lit in my chest. That night, I sat under the dim glow of my desk lamp, scribbling into that notebook. I wrote about triumph, about a version of me that could rise above the ridicule. I wrote about a future where my voice mattered, where laughter wasn't aimed at me, but maybe, just maybe, at the absurdity of those who doubted me. By the time I closed the notebook, I had made a quiet vow. I wouldn't just survive Eastwood, I would rise. I would go out into the world, gather knowledge, skill, and confidence, and return to the place that once mocked me, not as the girl they saw, but as someone they couldn't ignore. That notebook became my talisman, a reminder that the small acts of courage today could shape the victories of tomorrow. And even as I stepped away from those hallways, I carried it like a secret armor, hidden but potent. After graduation, I left Eastwood Academy behind like a shadow I was determined to outgrow. College in Boston was my proving ground. I rented a tiny apartment above a bookstore, where the scent of old paper and coffee became the backdrop to my late-night study marathons. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, juggling barista shifts, tutoring, and internships, all while carrying that leather-bound notebook like a secret compass. It was in one of those internships that I met Mr. Harrison, a seasoned editor at a small publishing house. He didn't know anything about my past, but he recognized the intensity in my work, the meticulous way I approached even the smallest assignments. "You have a voice that commands attention," he said one evening, as the last of the office lights flickered off. "Don't let anyone mute it." His words echoed Ms. Reynolds' advice, and I felt the first real sense that someone believed in me. The first few years were grueling. Rejection letters stacked up on my desk. Late nights were punctuated by the hum of fluorescent lights and the ache of doubt settling in my shoulders. There were moments I questioned if I was fooling myself, If the girl who'd been mocked in hallways really had the strength to belong anywhere. But every time I faltered, I returned to that notebook, reading the words I had written years ago. It reminded me that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just persistence in the quiet hours. Small victories began to accumulate. My first successful pitch to a major publisher. My first client who trusted me with their brand. My first paycheck that felt like proof that I could sustain myself without leaning on anyone's approval. I kept most of these wins private. Social media updates were careful, neutral, never a brag, just glimpses that didn't betray the full scope of what I had built. The world knew me as competent, professional, diligent. Few could guess the fire that had fueled every step of my rise. It wasn't just about success, it was about transformation. I studied leadership, finance, and organizational dynamics. I sought mentors who could refine my instincts and push me past my comfort zones. I learned to navigate boardrooms, negotiate contracts, and claim authority in spaces where I had once been silenced. Each small win, each skill mastered, was a thread weaving together the armor I would one day wear back at Eastwood. Through it all, that notebook remained with me. Pages tattered, margins scribbled with reflections, ideas, and plans. It wasn't just a relic of a bullied teenager, it was proof of growth, resilience, and vision. Every line reminded me, the girl who was mocked could one day return not just as a survivor, but as someone who held the power to shape the world she once feared. The first time I stepped back into Eastwood Academy as a board member, my heart fluttered in a mix of nostalgia and triumph. The main hallway smelled faintly of polished wood and chalk dust. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting patterns on the tiled floor, patterns that once seemed endless when I was a scared, awkward girl navigating these corridors. I arrived early, wanting to take in the space before the meeting began. The boardroom was more elegant than I remembered. Dark mahogany panels, portraits of past leaders, and shelves lined with plaques of excellence. I ran my fingers over the edge of the polished table, feeling a thrill at the thought of sitting here, not as a student, but as someone whose decisions would now influence this institution. Then they walked in. Faces I recognized from those cruel teenage years, girls who had laughed at my shoes, teachers who had shrugged off my potential, and classmates who had whispered behind my back. They didn't see Chloe Dawson, the board member, yet. They saw the girl they once underestimated. I let them take it in. Their eyes swept over my tailored blazer, the subtle confidence in my posture, the calm way I surveyed the room. For a moment, no one spoke. The irony was delicious, but I held it silently, savoring the quiet tension before the storm of revelation. Finally, I spoke. I'm Chloe Dawson. You may remember me from Eastwood Academy's class of 2010, I said, letting my voice glide smoothly across the room. A few eyebrows arched. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Today, I serve on the Board of Trustees. I'll be overseeing key programs, funding allocations, and academic initiatives. In other words, the decisions that shape the future of this school. Shock flickered across their faces. Ms. Reynolds, who had always quietly supported me, gave a small, knowing smile. The others, however, froze. The boys who once mocked my math grades now looked as though someone had yanked the rug from under them. The girls who had whispered jokes now swallowed hard, suddenly realizing the girl they had dismissed was the one holding influence over what they had once believed was untouchable. I continued, letting the truth land with precision. Many of you may have thought this girl, humble, uncertain, laughed at in hallways, would fade into obscurity. But life has a way of surprising those who underestimate others. Today, I'm in a position to make meaningful change here, to invest in programs that matter, and to lead initiatives that will shape generations of students. There were murmurs. Faces flushed. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, their casual superiority evaporating under the calm authority radiating from me. I watched them squirm, not with cruelty, but with satisfaction, a satisfaction that came from the quiet fulfillment of proving what years of dedication, sacrifice, and unyielding focus could achieve. And in that room, I felt it, the culmination of every late night, every small victory, every whispered hope scribbled into my old notebook. The girl who had been mocked had returned not just unbroken, but stronger, wiser, and entirely untouchable by the echoes of the past. With the room finally quiet, I let the moment stretch. I had the upper hand now, not out of malice, but because power had a way of demanding respect when it had once been denied. I surveyed the faces before me, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the way their eyes darted nervously. These were the same people who had once defined my limits. Now, they were at the mercy of my presence and choices. I began carefully, my voice calm, deliberate. "I want to make something clear," I said. "I'm here to help this school flourish. But assistance comes with responsibility. Old habits that allowed mediocrity, cruelty, or complacency won't be tolerated. We're past that now." There were soft nods, but also skeptical glances. I smiled, not to reassure, but to signal that compassion and firmness could coexist. "First," I continued, "students deserve teachers who see their potential, not just their mistakes. That means we invest in mentorship programs, encourage creativity, and hold ourselves accountable for nurturing talent. Second, gossip, judgment, and ridicule are toxic. They end here. Anyone wishing to participate must commit to fostering respect, empathy, and inclusion." The murmurs were louder now, some shuffling nervously, but I pressed on. "Third, this institution thrives on innovation and growth. I expect all of us, including myself, to embrace change, continuous learning, and accountability. If we're going to lead, we lead responsibly." Finally, I looked at them individually, teachers, former classmates, even administrators who had once scoffed at my ideas. And for those who doubted me, who laughed at me, or dismissed what I could achieve, you have a choice. You can remain trapped in the past, or you can evolve alongside this school. Growth is always optional, but the future is not. I watched as reality sank in. No one could argue with these conditions. They were fair, logical, and rooted in accountability. But beyond that, they carried a subtle message. Respect is earned, and it begins with actions. After a long pause, I added softly, almost personally, "I am not the same girl who walked these hallways in fear. I am a partner in this school's success, and I will ensure that Eastwood Academy is stronger, wiser, and kinder because of it. And anyone who wishes to contribute positively is welcome, but the rules are clear. We move forward together, or not at all." There was silence. Then slowly nods. Small smiles. A collective understanding that the dynamic had shifted permanently. I wasn't there to punish, nor to gloat. I was there to lead, to set conditions that aligned respect, growth, and accountability with real change. For the first time in years, I felt no tension, no lingering doubt. The girl who had been mocked had become the woman shaping the path forward. And in that moment, power was no longer about revenge. It was about transformation for them, for the school, and for me. Months passed, and Eastwood Academy began to transform, not overnight, but in quiet, deliberate ways. Mentorship programs flourished. Students were encouraged to explore passions previously dismissed, and the culture of judgment slowly gave way to one of respect. I watched from the board, sometimes quietly observing, sometimes guiding initiatives, and each success felt like a personal triumph far beyond the walls of the old school. I often found myself returning to that leather-bound notebook, now tucked safely in my office. The pages were worn, edges curled, ink faded in places, but every line reminded me of who I once was, a girl overlooked, underestimated, and underestimated again. And yet, here I was, shaping an institution that had once seemed impossible to belong to, quietly honoring the little voice that had whispered, "You will rise." One afternoon, as I walked through the halls, a young student approached me, timid but hopeful. "Are you really on the board?" she asked, eyes wide. I smiled warmly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I am. And I'm here to make sure students like you never feel invisible." The gratitude in her eyes hit me in a way that no accolades, no recognition, could replicate. I thought of Ms. Reynolds, now retired but still in touch, and how her small act of faith, The notebook, the encouragement, had set this entire journey in motion. Without it, perhaps I wouldn't have believed in myself as fiercely as I did. Every step I had taken, every obstacle I had faced, had led me to this, a woman standing tall, wielding influence not for revenge, but for positive change. And in that moment, I realized the true power of my journey. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about resilience, integrity, and leaving a legacy that mattered. I placed the notebook back in its drawer, gently closing it. "We rise," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "And we rise for those who need it most." For the first time, I walked the halls without the weight of the past pressing on my shoulders. I was no longer the girl who had been mocked. I was the woman who had returned, stronger, wiser, and ready to lead. And that, I knew, was the final word.